figuring out a solution after a solution that worked for a while, and then it didn't work. Nothing was sustainable. We would sit there at the beginning and the person would be going, come on, how can food be addictive? Come on, everyone has to eat food. But by the end of the interview, they would be going, oh my God, I think my wife might be an addict. I think I might be.
Now, how can food, I should ask the question, how can food become addictive?
So it's in the part of the brain where our survival instinct is, and our emotion and our impulse. It's the part of our brain that makes us do things without thought. This is all subconscious thinking. The backstory behind that is that there's neurochemistry in the reward pathway. There's dopamine primarily, which is our neurochemical of desire, motivation, of excitement. Anytime you think, I want something, that's dopamine. Addiction is just want, unlimited want. I just want. Even if I actually wish I could stop wanting, I still want. That's the irony of addiction, is the person is wishing they could stop wanting while the wanting is getting bigger and worse.
Hey Keto Camper, Ben Azadi here. Oh boy, I got quite the episode for you today. If you struggle with food addiction, carbohydrate addiction, sugar addiction, as a matter of fact, any kind of addiction, you're going to want to pay attention to this episode with a world leader in food addiction, Dr. Vera Tarman. Dr. Vera is going to explain how food can become so addictive, how these big food companies have brilliant scientists that manufacture foods that make us crave it and want to eat it all the time, and how to overcome that. She also gets into the negative impacts of sugar and high carbohydrate diets and what it does to the brain, and what you can do to rewire that brain using keto and fasting, and in actually 21 to 28 days overcome your addiction for good. We'll talk about the different stages of food addiction, why protein could be your best friend here, and so much more. I can't wait to bring her on this episode of the Keto Camp podcast with you. So without further ado, let's get into this amazing conversation with Dr. Vera Tarman.
Dr. Vera Tarman, welcome to the Keto Camp podcast.
Hello, thank you for asking me to be here.
Of course, you're doing such wonderful work, and it's an important topic, food addiction, sugar addiction, and we're going to talk all about ways to overcome that. You're going to share, I'm sure, some inspirational stories that you have outlined in your book and some principles. And before we get to all that, I'd love for you to just share your story, how you got involved with what you're doing today.
So my story is that I'm a physician here in Toronto, Canada, and I'm primarily an addictions physician. And specifically where I work on the continuum of addiction is people who come into treatment, into new recovery. So they're coming into a residential setting, they're putting down their alcohol, their cocaine, sometimes even cigarettes, and marijuana, and the whole gamut. And what I saw in my work was people were putting down those substances and then picking up the sugar that was all over them. So they were drinking the juice, the pop, the donuts that were given late at night, the pasta, all the rest of it. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, gaining weight, and greatly disturbed about that. I didn't initially really worry too much I worried about it, but I didn't really think too much about it until I kind of started connecting the dots maybe 15 years ago, because I've been in this field for a while now, where I just saw that behavior was very much like their behavior of eating was very much like their previous behavior of addiction. And I started reading just on my own, just because of my own story, which is what I'm going to get to here in a second, about addiction in general and how it's really all the same thing. And when I actually saw that there was research that substantiated that, I sort of went on the campaign trail, as it were, to speak about it publicly. So that's sort of the professional front of how I got into this. But my personal front is that in my 20s, like so many young women in their 20s in university, I was trying to control my weight, and found that I got into a sort of binge purge cycle. And this was in the 70s and 80s, when the whole thing about eating disorder just came on the scene in the psychiatric world, but people weren't really aware of what it was. So I didn't get caught in that system because it was just still too new. And so I kind of backed off and did my own thing, for which I am now grateful for. Otherwise, I would have been caught even today, as many people are in the eating disorder world, and they should be in the food addiction world, but that didn't exist then, and it barely exists now. So anyway, there I was trying to sort out my food, trying to sort out my weight, figuring out a solution after a solution that worked for a while, and then it didn't work. Nothing was sustainable. And then I came across the medical literature where I was talking about, and the two converged about 15 to 20 years ago. And then since then, I've been talking about it. So that's my story.
I love your story, and you're right. It's not spoken about often enough. So we need more Dr. Veras out there preaching this message. So you noticed that your patients had an addiction for drugs or alcohol, whatever it was, and then what they did was just transfer it to a food addiction.
Yes, it was so obvious to me. And for people who are out there in the world and maybe don't know somebody intimately who uses drugs in a really problematic way, they may not see that the behavior is so similar because they don't see the obvious example of it. But once you see one, it's like, oh my God, it looks so much like the other.
And then you wrote this book. You decided to write a book. I'm holding it in my hands for those watching on YouTube. Food Junkies: Recovery from Food Addiction. So why did you decide to write this?
So I wrote that. That's the second edition, and I wrote the first one about 6 years ago because I was on the campaign trail, as it were, trying to tell people about this. And I mean, even today, it's still not acknowledged in the DSM-5, which is the psychiatric manual of the manual of all the sort of psychiatric disorders. It's still not in there. We're trying to get it in there. And so for a doctor to be talking about this and it's not even in there, it was really hard to get any airtime. So people would just say, well, yeah, who are you? You should write about this. And, I said, writing a book is a lot of work. It's a lot of trouble. It's not, you don't just sit down and write it. But I just kept getting told, in order to be heard and taken seriously, you have to write about this. So I did, and then that enabled me to synthesize some of the data that was out there at the time and try to write it in such a way that people could understand. And I was just really, really pleased that, I got a lot of interviews from the press and whatnot. And the sort of typical story was that we would sit there at the beginning and the person would be going, come on, how can food be addictive? Come on, everyone has to eat food. But by the end of the interview, they would be going, oh my God, I think my wife might be an addict. I think I might be. It's sort of like, once you start to get what we're really talking about, I think it actually becomes more evident how prevalent it is out there. And the book was just it's like a way to get out there and have people discuss this issue.
And it was a success because you've been on multiple TV networks, and it got this message out there even more. So it was a good idea for you to write it. I know it takes a lot of time to write the book, but I think it was worthwhile.
Yeah.
So why is food so addictive? How can food? I should ask the question: how can food become addictive?
Yeah. So the thing that there's another book that just came out now by Michael Moss that's called Hooked. How the food giants hook us. And his book, it was, and his original book was a real inspiration for me for my book, because what he talked about was, in today's world, 2021, 2015, 2000, the food industry has manufactured foods, primarily processed carbs, but there's also processed meats and whatnot that are not healthy either. But they manufactured them to be addictive, basically. I mean, Michael Moss, who's like the guy he's not the food industry, but he captures their language and he captures their view. I highly recommend that people read his new book. He says they use the word craveability. How do we make our foods craveable? We should just call it addictive. So just by virtue of the food industry targeting sort of neurochemistry in our brain, in our reward pathway, in our addictive pathway, this is how any food becomes addictive, and how anybody becomes not exactly a food addict, but at risk. So some people less so than others. And how that happens is that the food industry has figured out what is the reward pathway of just, we are primed to like sweet or fat, especially together, because they're energy dense. That's just the way we are. I mean, mother's milk, that's what it was. But we're only meant to have so much of that in a healthy way. But so the food industry has taken this sort of natural inclination towards energy dense food and exploded it so that we're like getting bombed on this. And food addiction, diabetes, all the consequences of stuff that you write about, that you're dealing with your clientele, are the consequences of this bomb. And if we stuck with the fruit that's in 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day tops, a little bit of veggies and not the super dense ones, we would be in much better order. But that's not what happens.
Yeah, there's some really brilliant scientists that are paid some good money to figure out that how to activate those pathways. So what exactly, can you explain what's happening in the brain with these chemicals like dopamine when you're eating these foods that are processed like sugar?
That's right. So we have this natural reward center, which is in the limbic system, limbic part of the brain, which is sort of the middle part. I guess we could say that, if the brain has the reptilian, the mammalian, and the sort of human brain, and this would be in the mammalian brain. So it's in the part of the brain where our survival instinct is, and our emotion and our impulse. It's the part of our brain that makes us do things without thought. This is all subconscious thinking, because that's in the frontal lobe, higher order of our thinking. So in this lower order of our thinking, the animal part of us, we have this reward pathway that rewards me to do things that are healthy for me, like sex, like food, like good food. Energy dense food, like companionship, and just getting up out of bed and doing something. That part of the brain, the backstory behind that is that there's neurochemistry in the reward pathway. There's dopamine primarily, which is our neurochemical of desire, of motivation, of excitement, of anytime you think, I want something, that's dopamine. When you have that feeling of want, you're experiencing dopamine. And, addiction is just want, unlimited want. I just want. Even if I actually wish I could stop wanting, I still want. That's the irony of addiction, is the person is wishing they could stop wanting while the wanting is getting bigger and worse. So that's dopamine, but there's also endorphin, and there's also serotonin, and these are endorphin is that comfortable enjoy experience, so you can enjoy your food. You get that feeling of fullness that comes from an endorphin experience, and serotonin, which is that connectedness, the sleepy, easy, I'm comfortable, I'm safe feeling that you get when you eat a lot of carbs, but then of course it goes away in 20 minutes. That's the problem, because it's too much all at once. So these are neurochemicals that if I could not access them, because let's say I had a cold and I don't smell because I have a cold, the smell goes to that part of the brain, and I smell something, now I want that. That's the dopamine. So there's that connection. And then because I want that, I will go and make the effort to go and get it. If I have a cold and I don't have that dopamine push to do something, I don't want to get up. I'm hungry, but I don't want to eat. It's not going to taste good. I don't want to bother. So that's a sort of essential piece to make the effort to do all those things I have to do. And we can blast that thing out of existence, which is what addiction is. It's making me want that whole bag of chips, and I can't stop at 1 or 2 because the neurobiology is so tampered with. I'm sure, you're coming from the keto community, and a lot of the medical justification for keto is, it's because we're trying to deal with the whole insulin diabetic disaster that food has caused. And really, if I can just make it clear to people here that physicians, especially physicians who are interested in low carb and keto, are all about the physical manifestations of sugar and high carb. Addiction is really like the same phenomena, but it's happening in the brain. And instead of it being an insulin, resistance, it's a dopamine resistance because of this blasting of our dopamine receptors and neuroadaptation, because we're living in this world of too much and we have to adapt to that. And the adaptation is not diabetes, it's addiction. See, but it's the same kind of thing that's happening in the brain.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the solution to food addiction is to get a cold. Right now, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah. Except the thing is, and that's a joke, but actually there is truth to that in the sense that some of the medication for food addiction, and I'm not going there with this because I don't think this is a good solution. I actually like the keto solution instead. But one of the treatments for food addiction is to use a drug that's called Contrave, which has naloxone in it or naltrexone in it. That's an anti-opiate. So it's when you smell something, one of the things you're triggering is that endorphin receptor. I want that feeling. Well, I could literally cut that by taking that pill, either through Contrave or directly through naltrexone or naloxone, which is the same drug that you use for the opiate addict who is out on the street and you want to, revive them and give them Narcan. Same thing. So we take it so that we don't get that endorphin rush with the smell or the whatever. But the problem with that is I don't then get it I have that endorphin experience for a good reason. It's, to have the pleasure of endorphins, we need endorphins. They are our joy chemical. I have something bad that happens, and then at the end of that bad, I have a good cry, that's endorphin. I have a laugh, that's endorphin. I have if it doesn't hurt me, it makes me stronger. The bad has somehow moved into a positive. That's all endorphin. Do I want to take that away with a drug? No. What I'd rather do is, I like the nutritional approach, which is essentially the low carb keto approach.
So would taking that drug do something similar to taking blood sugar medication? Will it actually make the condition worse in the long run?
I think it potentially can, because every medication you put into your mouth, your body, eventually you develop a tolerance. If it's a big blast, then it's an immediate tolerance. But even over time, you think about people who are on antidepressants. If they've been on them for 10 years, they're not on that same small dose that they started with. They're on a much higher dose, or now they're on 2 or 3. Why? Not because they're getting sicker, but because they become tolerant to that dose, and you just have to keep upping the dose. I think that, I think it's the same thing, because ultimately you give somebody insulin, you're not actually treating the condition, and it's just prolonging the whole it's actually making that whole process worse. And I don't think anyone's actually followed to say that it's making it worse, but it doesn't in the end help.
It's kind of like listening to music at loud levels and you become deaf. You wouldn't just increase the volume to get the same effect. You would actually slowly decrease the volume. So that would be the solution. Yeah,
I like that analogy. I haven't heard that one. I like that analogy. Yeah, and then the sound is decreased for when you really want to have an endorphin experience, like a good laugh or just the sense of joy. Like people feel flat. And part of withdrawal is that feeling of, how am I going to live without my tub of Haagen-Dazs or my whatever? Well, because you're deaf now. And, the good news is eventually you reclimatize, but it takes a while.
Yeah. And that analogy was from Dr. Jason Fung, who's in your area, by the way. So I want to give credit to him.
Yes.
So you mentioned dopamine being resistant, and it's not just from the food, right? Because we are on social media all day. Yeah. I was reading that the average person is scrolling on their phone enough times in one day to climb the Empire State Building. So we're getting all these likes and these hearts and these emails and these dings. So that also contributes to this resistance, right?
Yes, absolutely it does. Yes. And it's not just that, but they're also on dopamine, like ADHD medication and it's on many corners.
So we want to turn the dial down. So we do that by changing our food habits. So what's the first start? Let's ask this question. How about if somebody is not even sure that they are a food addict? In your book, you have different stages of food addiction, and you have some questions to ask. Could you explain that so people could identify if they actually are dealing with this? Yeah,
sure. So, when we talk about addiction, it's essentially like diabetes too. Like I actually think they're very similar. Just one is body and one is brain. We say that it's a chronic progressive condition, and that means that once you're sort of on that road, it can idle, it can slow down, but it's it's not like it goes away and you start fresh again. Like there's a kind of gradual neuro adaptation. It's really the brain just doing its job. The brain is in an abnormal environment, the food environment or the drug environment, and it has to adapt, which is what brains do. They adapt, and then once they've adapted, there's no going back. But when you're living in a super toxic environment, you have to adapt extreme measures. So where am I going with this here?
The questions to ask if you know that you're a food addict.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we'll just start with that. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you know that these are essentially the questions of, am I an addict of any sort? But remember how I said earlier on, just living in this food environment, the way it is today, I think everybody is, like, I guess we would say, in that mild stage, because you're living in an environment where you're constantly, unless you step out by being like in a keto or low carb or raw or some kind of environment where you're outside of the processed world, you're being teased. It's like you may not be a smoker, but you're having a cigarette every few days. Like you're not exactly a smoker, but you're on your way to becoming one. That's just living in this environment. If you're living in that environment to the point where all you do is eat that stuff, and you're doing it 2 or 3 times a day, or now we're eating all the time, grazing, like literally all the time. There's no fasting of any sort. Some people, not even an hour goes by before they're eating something else. So it becomes like ever more frequent. Anything that the brain has this reward pathway, which is perfect with a certain amount, which I usually say is equivalent to maybe 1 glass of wine a day or 1 or 2 apples a day in terms of fruit or fructose, and when you're starting to get beyond that, you're stretching the parameters of what the brain can handle, and then it has to adapt differently. And one of the things that happens as things change is, like you said, the noise is getting flatter, you're getting deafer. So you have to raise the noise up to be able to hear it. And in order to appreciate it, you have to turn it up even more. So essentially what's happening is a tolerance is happening. And as that tolerance happens, you have to do more work just to feel the same. And that means that there's more mental investment, there's more financial investment, there's more social investment, whatever. I'm not going to go out tonight because I'm not feeling good. I'd rather sit at home and watch TV and eat. But so I'm going to cancel things. I don't feel well today, so I'm not going to go into work and all that kind of stuff. So
I want to pause this interview real quick and say thank you so much for reaching this point of the interview. If you're getting any value so far, hit the thumbs up button on this video down below. And check out the subscribe button here on the channel. If you're not subscribed to the Keto Camp YouTube channel as of yet, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you're notified when we go live, release a brand new video. We do that 2 to 3 times per week. I want to take a few seconds here to get to the sponsor of this episode, which is Upgraded Formulas. If you're anything like me, you probably spend quite an amount of money on supplements every single month. Wouldn't it be great if you knew you were absorbing those supplements or not absorbing those supplements? What I'm bringing you today is an exciting new opportunity to test the accuracy of the supplementation, the vitamins and the minerals, if they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. After all, you can't be a biohacker without testing, can you? In this case, I'm referring to Upgraded Formulas, Upgraded Hair Test Kit, and Consultation. It's very easy to do this test. It's a kit that's sent to you. You would just use hair from your body. It could be head, it could be body, it could be pubic hair. You send in your hair and then you get a consultation and you review which supplements you should be taking versus which supplements you shouldn't be taking. How well are you absorbing that? And this will be a great way to discover why you just don't feel so well. Even if you're taking all these supplements, but you still feel tired, you still have symptoms. This will give you the exact picture on what you should do next to correct that issue. I love Upgraded Formulas. I had Barton Scott on my podcast, the Keto Camp podcast, before. We have an exclusive offer for you to get 10% off your hair mineral analysis kit and any of their amazing supplements, which are highly absorbed. Head to upgradedformulas.com. Use the coupon code BEN10, that is BEN10, at checkout to get 10% off today. We will also drop a link down below for you. That's upgradedformulas.com. Use the coupon code BEN10. All right, let's get back to this incredible interview.
So the substance starts to become not just a pleasurable activity, but almost not exactly an obsession, but it's becoming ever present on the mind. And if I don't have it, as I become tolerant, I'm also becoming somewhat dependent. If I don't have it, then I feel worse than I did before when I didn't have it at all. So I'm now starting to develop an emotional attachment, which starts off as a craving, but then eventually becomes an obsession. How will I get through the night without eating anything? How will I get through the night without having my bottle of wine or my cigarettes? I'm so upset and I don't have any cigarettes. How will I survive? How will I get by without my tub of Haagen-Dazs? I'm mentioning that one because that was one of my favorites.
Me too.
And so the thought of not having it's like, I won't be able to sleep, so there's a dependency there, and there's basically an obsession, and that's dopamine heightened. So, how do I know that I'm a food addict? Well, is my obsession beyond, I want to say beyond normal, excessive, seemingly obsessive, excessive and obsessive. And then that's the first thing. And then the second thing is as I'm moving into that tolerance, which is the second thing, I'm starting to cause impairment because it's neuroadaptation. It's also impairment out in the world. I've canceled my job. I've canceled my friends. I don't want to go out and see them any, all that kind of stuff. Things are changing in my external environment, which are usually impairments of some sort. That's the third thing. I mean, we can look at the 20 questions of food addiction, but they all measure these parameters. And then the fourth thing is you realize that you're in trouble because you're now, you've got diabetes and your weight is fluctuating all over the place, and you lose weight and then you gain it back, et cetera, et cetera. You try to stop and you find that you can't, or you can, but only for a while. And then because of the obsession and the dependence, you keep slipping back. And so basically it ends up happening that you try to stop and you can't, and it just gets worse. So that whole phenomena just gets more and more obsessed in your mind. That's now your life. So early stage food addiction is I'm just eating too many chips and I wish I could stop and I'm on a diet and but then that becomes more and more dominant until you're 300 pounds and you still can't lose the weight. And even though you've got a coach and even though you're running like crazy, it still doesn't work because it's become it's progressive. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And if you're going to a medical doctor, probably in the States, certainly here in Canada, because we're not using the word addiction, they're going to make suggestions like, well, just go on a diet or
count your calories. And because, when you're hungry, this is one of the things I'm worried about with fasting, which I hope we can talk about. Mm-hmm. When you're hungry, your dopamine is even more alert. And so you have to be like really careful not to have like the heightened sugary, carby stuff, because you're going to be more likely to become addicted. Mm-hmm. It's like the person who has bariatric surgery is more heightened to the effects of alcohol. So they're more likely to become alcoholic, and similarly food addicted. So you have to be very careful if you're moving down this path of food addiction. Don't be walking into a regular place and counting your calories. It will just make it worse. Yeah, and it's a huge distraction to what really is important, which is cell metabolism, all these hormones, this orchestra in the body.
Yes, and you know what I see happening. I'm going to stop and let you ask your question, but I just want to say this. One of the things I see happen a lot is people, they get to 200 pounds and they think, okay, I've got to go to the gym and I've got to work out. I got to work out really hard, like an hour or two, and that is like the last thing that is useful to do, like the last thing.
I agree with you. Hey, the body doesn't lose weight to get healthy. It gets healthy to lose weight.
Exactly. I agree.
Let's talk about the fasting, because here's how I teach it, and you could give me your feedback. So the way that I teach it, I have a new book coming out called Keto Flex. It'll be out by the time this is out, but I have my 4-pillar approach. So the first pillar, and I don't focus on food addiction. That's your specialty. I'll send people to you. But the first pillar is teaching somebody who's a sugar burner, who's eating every 2 to 3 hours, carbohydrates, their cells are only burning glucose. Yeah. And in about 14 to 30 days to teach their body to become fat adapted. So we eat more healthy fats, we eliminate the snacking. And then I pair it with my second pillar, that's intermittent fasting. But the way that I teach it is not to necessarily eat less, but to just eat less often and making sure you're eating plenty of protein during your eating window. So give me some feedback on how that would work with somebody who has a food addiction.
Okay, so the thing that I've always found really interesting, when I started this whole thing, this whole campaign, that when I go out there and talk as much as I can about this stuff, keto did not exist. I mean, yes, we had Atkins, but it was kind of in the back as people were laughing at him still, and the whole concept of low carb was just coming in on the scene. And as I saw that grow, I just kept thinking they have stumbled onto the solution without even like my solution, the food addiction solution, without even realizing it. And we would talk about how in my world, in the medical world, that what's the point of telling somebody to lose weight, because they're only going to gain back more. So like, let's just get them away from that. But the weight plans were never low carb or keto. They were like stupid stuff, like just counting your calories, but eating moderately all this crappy food, which inevitably what people would do is they would say, well, I can only eat so much, so it's going to be all that stuff I really like, and then they cut out all the good stuff, like the carbs and the fat and the proteins and the fats and the good veggies, because they want to eat the other stuff, which just makes things worse. So I actually saw they've stumbled onto the solution, which is your first pillar, which is cut out the sugars, cut out the carbs, which is essentially cutting out the trigger, the most highly triggering of the addiction. So from my vantage point, what we would teach is cut out the sugar, not because it was low carb or keto, but because that was the trigger. And when I realized, oh my God, you guys are saying the same thing that I am, but from a different point of view, for a different reason, that's why I could see why the low carb groups didn't crash and burn after 5 years, like so many food plans do. Like you never hear about so many of these. I mean, there may be a new name, like keto might be called something else in 5 years from now, but it's going to be the same principle, because you've actually stumbled onto a solution, which is to cut the carbs out and whatnot. Now, the next piece about intermittent fasting or fasting is it would depend on where that person with food addiction how far they've gone and what their previous history is. So for you, I would like it if you could have a footnote somewhere, or just footnote it somewhere on a blog, that if you think you're food addicted, be aware of these pitfalls. So one of them being, if they have a history of starving themselves because of they've eaten and now they're going to starve themselves for 3 days to make up for it, because you don't want that person to, you built a sort of connectedness, an association of big binge now fast,
as like a punishment, right? They use it as a punishment.
Yes, or just to try to make up for it, or they're going to run like 4 hours for the next day, and you don't want that sort of cyclical pattern. You have to sort of step out of that, I suggest to people that if they have a strong history of food addiction, not a mild, because I think everybody is, like I said, living in today's society, but a stronger one with a long history of like some people are like just volume addicts, like they need to eat a certain amount just because they need to. They don't even care what they're eating. It could be vegetables. That it be seen as a medical intervention. So there should be somebody that's following very closely so that they are not slipping into a pattern. And it might be that some people cannot do a strong fast. Like they might be able to do a window of 12 hours, maybe 14 hours, but not like 20 hours or something like that. And I really worry about like the 2 or 3 days or the 2 or 3 week fast for somebody like that, because they might be just too damaged. So just a caveat to say, like if our talk today led to this, I'd be very happy, which would be like some kind of a footnote somewhere to say, if you think you're a food addict, we should have a further discussion about what that fast might look like. Or
absolutely.
Is it a trigger? Yeah.
I love that addition. Absolutely. It will trigger that for me to include that, because it's important. And I do mention things like, if you have a history of anorexia or eating disorders, this might not be a good idea for you to do fasting without a professional.
Yes.
But yeah, adding more, notes like that, because fasting could be super healing, but it's a tool like any other tool. It could hurt you if you don't know how to use it. Right. So I love that. We're on the same.
I think it could really hurt if you don't. Like it can throw you back into a relapse. but I think if it's done carefully, it might be fine. It might be fine.
Yeah. So in your book, you show like a meal plan, and you emphasize a lot of protein. And I know why I love protein. It helps activate those satiety hormones. So why do you talk about protein so much? Why are you a fan of protein?
I think it's more that I'm not so much a fan of protein as I'm a fan of lower carb. So we want to have protein and fat to give satiety. And I always tell people, if you're going to err on the side of sugar or fat, err on the side of fat. Eat too much fat. Don't eat the sugar. I think that when I wrote that book, the whole keto thing was, it's really exploded in the last few years, right? And I think the understanding at that point was if you're low carb, you're probably higher protein, and that's what I would have identified with. Now I would just say, I think it's if I can go as far as to say that keto light is low carb, and then there's super keto, which is like just protein and fat, or like 70% fat or something like that. Then that whole platform is good. And if a person is eating carbs, which I would suggest that I don't have a problem with that as long as it's not processed carbs and it's on the glycemic index on the lower side.
Like leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, sort of thing. Yep. Yeah, I love it. And you, in your book, there's a great chapter in there that I love the title, and it resonated with me. It was called "Switching Addictions and the Power of Substitution."
Right.
So I'd love for you to share about that, because you already mentioned a little bit about it, how you had the addicts that switch from one addict to the other. So talk about that chapter, and then how do you put an end to that once and for all?
Yeah. Okay. So it really what it is just, switching addictions is just switching because you have basically an impaired dopamine response, just like the diabetic has an impaired insulin response. That impaired dopamine response translates to, I have a flat dopamine. It doesn't respond anymore. It's like I'm deaf. Like you said, I love that analogy. And so I need the music to be louder now. And so if it's louder through food, great. If it's louder through drugs and alcohol. And usually what I saw is that people, and this I found unbelievable, because in the drug world, there's a kind of hierarchy of what drugs are worse than others. And crystal meth, for example, is probably one of the most devastating of drugs. Like there's nobody who's a functional crystal meth addict for very long. You can be a functional cocaine addict or an alcoholic for a number of years before you crash and burn, lose your job and home and all that. Crystal meth, you're done in a year or two. You're on the street or almost. So it's a pretty devastating disease. And I've heard people quit their crystal meth and then they write to me and say, I can't quit the sugar. It was actually harder to quit sugar than the crystal meth. But it's so ubiquitous and it's so small. It's like this sly little addiction that people, like this little itch that people don't even realize. It's probably like cigarette smoking. A lot of people will say that's harder to quit than heroin. It's because it's there all the time. You're always used to having something in your mouth, either food or smoking. And it's not like the big, but it's the ongoing itch.
And it's accepted socially as well.
Yes, exactly. See, at least now with cigarettes, we've made it so that, if I don't want you to smoke, you have to go outside and on my deck. I would love to see the same thing with sugar. If you want that dessert, you got to go outside on the deck to eat it.
There's a drug dealer at every corner, at the gas station, in the ice cream truck, at the Walgreens. Exactly. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. So the ease of it's just that heightened experience, because you want the noise to be, if not loud, at least loud enough. And that's all dopamine, and that's all impaired. So how do we get out of that? Well, the good news is, I guess it's the bad news in one way. It doesn't take that long to make that neuroadaptation. They say a habit takes 3 or 4 weeks to develop. That's kind of what's happening. The dopamine is taking a few weeks. So if I'm using opiates on a daily basis, it's only a few weeks, and I'm habituated to the point where I'm sick when I don't use. If I start smoking cigarettes, it doesn't take long before I'm smoking a pack a day, that sort of thing. And being a previous smoker, it wouldn't even take that long. I haven't smoked for many years, but if I were to pick up again, I was a pack a day smoker at one point. It would probably take me a week and I'd be back to being a pack a day.
Wow.
Not the first day. It would probably be one, maybe two. But by a week, it would be a pack. That would happen with sugar too, and that happens with drugs. So there's the neuroadaptation becomes quiet, and it does. So it takes about 3 or 4 weeks to get a robust impaired response. You stop cold turkey, and these are the words of addiction, not a diet, not cessation. Cold turkey. You even said it yourself. You said your plan is. Your stage 1 is 2 to 4 weeks.
14 to 28 days, yeah.
There you go. That's about how long it takes to get out of that. See, you intuitively you did a food addiction platform, because it takes about 4 weeks to get out of that state, so that now you're clean, and now all you're dealing with are all the triggers, which are psychological things, people, places, things. Oh, that smell. Oh, I really like that smell. Even though I haven't had it for a year, that smell of bread. I mean, it's still to this day, the smell of bread is like, ooh, just keep walking, Vera, but I don't want to go there because I know where that will take me. And similarly with cues, like you said, it's everywhere. Pushes are everywhere.
Yeah.
It's dealing with all those cues. This is addiction talk. Now, how do I deal with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. Go ahead.
Yeah, and your work, not just you, but you with your keto camp, and I mean, I don't know. Again, intuitively, you've got an addiction tool there. Really, just if you could just see what it is that you're actually doing, so that you can be aware of it when you have a food addict in place. So like having all this information, having the connection, the daily connection with a coach or a having a group. All that stuff is to buffer those pushers that are out there, and you may not realize it because you're not focusing on the addiction piece, but you're still doing it by saying, we're going to eat keto, we're going to do, we're following a food plan, we're doing whatever it is. You're still doing it, right?
I love it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I love that you're sharing that. Yeah, it's exactly what we do. And I have what's called my Keto Camp Academy. So we offer the accountability, the structure, the follow-up. So it's exactly what you're saying there, why it's so important.
And it's amazing how, it's a convergence. We're using the same things. We're just using, I guess, a different rationale for it. But that's why your thing works. And that's why, I mean, I'm just so delighted to be that we're talking, not specifically you and I, but like
I understand,
perspectives are talking, because we have a lot that we can give each other. And if you ever notice somebody in your world that keeps struggling, it's probably because, what would help them is to bring to light some of the addictive piece, and so that you can address that, because it's all built into the system. So that's probably the guy who's not following up on the keto camp piece, like the accountability and the whatnot. That's probably the guy who's trying to do it on his own.
Very helpful for you to share that, because that could help me communicate to that person and understand that person better. So that's awesome. Have you ever read the book, the Psycho-Cybernetics?
No, I have not.
So it's from like the 60s, from Dr. Maxwell Maltz. But in the book, he was a plastic surgeon. And he decided to really study the subconscious mind and these paradigms and the self-image out of that world. But in his research, he found that it was about 21 days on average after a person has gone through surgery, whether it's like a nose surgery or ear surgery, for them to accept that they have this new body. 21 days. So it kind of aligns with what you're saying, 3 to 4 weeks.
That's interesting.
And then one of my favorite quotes, I'm going to share it with you to see if you've heard it before, but it's this: the chains of habits are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. Ah,
okay. Yeah, that's very good. They're too weak to be felt. Yeah.
It's exactly what you teach, right? Because it's very small, and then and then it gets stronger, and then it's so hard to break it because it's built such a strong chain.
And we what we say there is that addiction is cunning and baffling, and that's the cunning, baffling piece, right? Because it's this paradox. It's weak until it's too strong.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah, I knew you would love that one.
Yeah.
So I would love to end the conversation with somebody who's listening to this or watching this right now, and they're like, that's me. Like, I didn't really realize that, but Dr. Vera, you're describing me. Where do I start right now?
Okay, well, I would say that you're already in the right place. So what you need to do is add in probably the psychological piece, or add in why the psychology will help you, so that parts that you might not be utilizing, you can utilize more. So what do I do? Like, first of all, you have to eat the right food. You have to stop the drug. And there's a lot of, I don't know if you get this. I don't know if you get this in your world, but in my world is, if I can just figure it out, if I can just take care of my problem, then I would eat properly. Then I wouldn't smoke anymore. I wouldn't do my drugs anymore. I just got to take the medication and heal the depression or do the therapy, and then I'll be able to do it. And the bottom line is, you have to stop the drug first, whether it be opiate or alcohol or food. You have to, in order to have a clear head and let the brain neuroadapt back. So going back to the 2 to 4 weeks or whatever it is, you got to stop. And if you're trying to wait until something happens so that you can stop, it doesn't work that way. So number one, food, be clean. And know that in that week or not week, that month, that first month, it is going to be difficult. No question that it will not be. It can be terrible. It can be maybe not as bad as you thought. But the fact that I have you, Ben, I have the whoever it is that I can call daily or bitch to on a group somewhere or something, just to get through that month. This isn't life. This is just this next month. Then at some point, we say in the addiction world, wait until the miracle happens. At some point in the 3 or 4 weeks, it gets easier, and then it gets easier, and then it gets easier. And then by week 4, it's like, oh man, I wish I had known this. I'm free. I feel free. And then you just have to protect yourself, that you don't think you're so free that you can just go back and have a little bit.
That's really, really promising. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the food is first. And then it's after that, it's all those other pieces, like the various pieces which are going to keep you clean. Whether it's a good meal plan, a sustainable one, not like I'm going to, eat crazy, like 800 calories, or just meat when I want to eat other stuff, but I want to lose weight. It has to be something that's sustainable, because you will lose weight. And that's the other thing. Don't focus on weight. Focus on clean eating and clean living, and the weight will take care of itself.
That's right.
I bet you're already doing all this.
Totally. I agree with you 100%. So that's the way the body works. It's exactly how the body works.
So I would just say, keep doing what you're doing here, but read my book and become more aware of the addiction piece, so that you can make sure you're not, that you're working on that too, that you're keeping that ball up there in the air as well. And one way to do that is you can go on my website. I have a Facebook group as well, that is a support group, free support group. There's actually a number of them now. It's very heartening to see this in this last few years, where people are just jumping on board to remind themselves that in this world, there are food pushers, and there is no shame in having food friends to buffer that. We're social creatures, and I don't know if you that phrase. I love that. That's too weak until it's too strong. That's social too. Somebody says something, you don't realize that it's infiltrating until it's too late. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can have a little bit of they made it for me. Okay. It's Christmas, it's Easter, and then it's too late. Mm-hmm. If I have a group where I'm going to, and they're saying, don't even go there. Yeah. Help it.
What's your group called, and what's your website?
The group is called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life.
I love that.
Yeah. And my website is addictionsunplugged.com. And I have a YouTube page too, just Vera Tarman. But the Facebook group is alive now, so I'm very excited about it. We have a podcast as well. You were on it, actually.
Yeah, Molly and Clarissa, they do amazing jobs.
Yeah. I'm very pleased with that.
Food Junkies podcast.
That's right, Food Junkies podcast. So that's also another way, and all that stuff is going to fit exactly what you're talking about, because your story. I mean, you have your own story, and I mean, you fit right into this whole thing. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just what we're doing is just fleshing out some of the addictive, the mental stuff.
Amen. I agree. Yeah, I would start with your book, Food Junkies. We'll put a link for it down below. Is the best place to get on Amazon or your website?
Yeah.
on
Amazon is the best place.
Something that I think the audience would really love when they read your book is the inspirational stories that you share of other people who had addictions and what they did to overcome it. There's a lot of testimonials in here.
Yeah.
And then they're going to really understand how their body and their brain works. And I believe when you're competent, you become more confident, and then it's going to really help you along the way.
Absolutely.
So I want to acknowledge you, Dr. Vera, for the work that you're doing, your book, your podcast, your YouTube, your website, the Facebook group. We'll put all that down below. I love that we're speaking a similar language.
Yeah.
You're doing such important work out there. And I really thank you for coming on the podcast and educating my community and myself today. I'm really grateful for you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for asking. Like I said, I think we're on the same page.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Vera Tarman. Go get her book, Food Junkies. We're going to drop a link for you down below to go get it. It's available on paperback, Audible, and Kindle. Go check out her website. Check out all the notes and resources we put together for you down below. Now is the time to overcome your food addiction for good. And we want to support you along the way. If you know somebody who has an addiction, send this episode to them, text it to them, email it to them, post it on your social media. You can make a big difference in their life today just by doing so. If you enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Vera Tarman, hit the thumbs up button on this video and make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you're notified when we release a new video. So hit that bell so you can get that notification. We release brand new episodes and videos twice to 3 to 4 times a week. So love for you to get subscribed here and get that content on a weekly basis. I recently did a video on 5 ways to quit your sugar addiction for good using keto. So if you're doing keto and you're struggling with those addictions and cravings, I want you to watch this video. I'm gonna outline some very practical steps for you. So click this video right there to learn about keto for sugar addiction, and I'll see you in that video.